Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to an all-new Questionable Decisions. My name is Taylor Gabriels. With me, as always, is Zach Scrappy Grattan, and to the right of him, yes, it is. It will forever be a thing. And to the right of him, the Godfather, Tim Thomas. Okay, so we've got a ton of stuff to get to today, so I'm not going to waste any time, and I'm sure you guys have plenty to say as well. But first, I do want to say this. If you've listened to our show and listened to Questionable Decisions in the past, you know that we like to cover a wide variety of things, from movies to video games to The Godfather's Wild Nights in Vegas and Scrappy's glory days in Pee Wee football. But we're not going to do any of that today. We've got an all MMA show. It's jam-packed, too much to get to. So,
well, our sport helped us. We got some stuff to talk about.
Finally.
Hey.
Finally.
We should be happy about that.
It's been a solid week.
Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah, a lot coming out of this past weekend. So let's just start with this. We've had time to now let UFC 227 sink in. What are your guys' takeaways? What's the big thing that stands out for you coming out of that weekend?
I mean, for me, it feels like we actually have something to kind of look forward to. I know a couple of QDs ago, we're talking about, like, you know, what is it? The Avengers Infinity Wars. That's what we're looking forward to, but now it's over. Like, what else? And we were looking for that, and we had it. And I think now we have something, again, to look forward to, whether it's the end of this year or the beginning of next year. Like, something to look forward to.
Well, okay, so first of all, to your exact point right now, it's like we said, who's your big villain? Okay, if you hate the Brock thing, and we'll get to that, it's Brock. You got your guy now. You got the bad guy that you can root against. But my big takeaway is DC. DC, you know, we just did the episode, and, you know, I sat there and said, you know, he's a champion with an asterisk. Well, no longer. He just beat Stipe in his prime, shut it down. He's a champion.
No question.
Is he the two-division true champion? That's a debate for another day, but the bottom line is nobody can take it away. He just beat Stipe in his prime. He's a true champion. Amazing.
Yeah, and you see what happens. I'm glad you said that, because that was going to be one of my questions to you, is if that fight changed anything in your mind.
100%.
And it obviously has. And it's funny because you see, as soon as he wins that, you've got all the other fighters coming out of the woodwork, lining up, wanting to fight DC now.
Yep.
It's just interesting.
Yep.
You know, at light heavyweight and heavyweight. Before his fight with Stipe, nobody's clamoring to fight the guy. And now he knocks out the heavyweight champ in the first round. And everyone is coming from other divisions.
Yep.
Trying to get a fight with
almost
this guy.
Comical.
It's
Some
funny.
of them.
It really is. It's funny. But and I mean, do you think that now DC is more of a draw? Do you think that that's part of the reason these fighters are wanting to come fight him? Because, I mean, obviously, if he fights Brock and wins, his next fight after that is going to be huge, whether it's against John Jones, which it most likely will be. But there's a lot of people chomping at the bit to get a big payday fight with DC.
Definitely. I don't think there's any question, especially the Brock fight, you know. And before we get too much into the Brock thing, I want to ask you a DC question. Do you think, you know, he did it to protect Kane, and it just really speaks to his character, but moving down, looking back, if there's an alternate timeline where if he had stayed at heavyweight and he weren't friends with Kane, now seeing how he's performed there, like, what would his legacy have been? Could he have been the heavyweight GOAT?
He could have been the heavyweight GOAT. Yes,
who would have beat
100%.
him? And I know you can't do that. You can't go back, but like, who was going to beat this guy?
Look at it. Who was the heavyweight champ around DC moving down? Kane. Kane beat everybody. I mean, he lost to Dos Santos one time, but Kane was beating everybody.
And clearly he can hang with Kane. He doesn't practice.
Well, let's just assume he's not going to fight Kane.
Right.
And he's in Kane's spot.
Right in his spot. Okay,
so
sure.
he's beating all the guys Kane's beating. Without a doubt, DC is going to take out all the guys Kane's taking out. He's probably going to take out Dos Santos.
Oh, yeah.
I would think.
The only thing I say against that is Dos Santos is like, he's a striker, and I'm not going to say that DC's not a striker. He clearly is, but you know, Kane would Kane let it get to him? He wanted to stand up with Dos Santos, and he paid for it. But would DC do the same thing?
Yeah, but that first fight, Kane was hurt.
Yep, it was a little fluky.
And then he wrestled and outboxed Dos Santos in the other 2 fights, and he pressured him. If we know anything, Kane won those fights with Dos Santos because of pressure. Mm-hmm. Because Dos Santos does not handle pressure very well. He kept backing up against the fence. He didn't know how to circle out. He was just getting mauled. What's the one thing they always say about DC? He can be undersized. He can be out, whatever. He's going to pressure you. He's going to keep coming forward. I think, again, we can't do MMA math, but I think we would have gotten the same result if we're just playing this whole fantasy scenario. Honestly, maybe Verdum with submissions, but I don't even think Verdum would have been a challenge for him. I don't know.
It's just almost like a little epilogue, and it's really cool that maybe we'll get to do a DC part 2 eventually, but man, what would have happened? He would have been the heavyweight GOAT, because when you see this, I mean, shit, Stipe was getting the accolade and he won. He defended it twice. I don't know who would have beat him, and it's really crazy he got to come in and do that.
So I don't want to transition and talk too much about John Jones, because this isn't really about John Jones. This is about DC's moment. But I do want to ask, because we did talk about it in DC's episode. You can't help but to do that. So I want to ask you this. Now that DC has done what he's done, is he still tied to John Jones? Is his legacy still tied to John Jones? And if it is, this is the one thing that I was thinking about. If John Jones comes back and he loses, not to DC, if he comes back and fights someone in the interim while DC's fighting Brock and loses, does that change anything? Because we always talk about, like, DC's got to beat John Jones to cement his legacy or to be known as better than John Jones. But what happens if Jones were to start losing and not to DC? Would that change Jones's narrative? Because right now, the whole thing with Jones is he's undefeated and he's the only guy to beat DC. Sort of like with Anderson and Weidman. When Anderson lost to Weidman, if Weidman had kept winning, those 3 fights that were so close and could have gone the other way, if he had won those 3 fights and was undefeated,
sure,
he would be talked about as maybe the greatest middleweight of all time. He beats Anderson Silva. He's undefeated. But because of those losses, Weidman's not even in this discussion, even though he knocked off Anderson, right?
Right.
So does the narrative change if John Jones loses, period, not just to DC?
Well, before you answer, Zach, I would just say this. I don't think that's even going to be a conversation, because with DC's limited timeline, he's going to retire by March, maybe a few months after. Maybe the summer makes even more sense if you get him to extend it and fight Jones. They're going to rush Jones into that fight again. I think he's going to come back and fight DC. But if he does, maybe he does. I don't know when his suspension's up. Is it still December, January? I don't understand
we don't know.
What's going
on. A ruling
on.
Technically, as of this point, hasn't come down.
Okay,
we don't know.
I don't know that he is going to fight, but if he does, I mean, do you have thoughts on that?
I think it's different because in the Weidman case, he beat Anderson, but Anderson was already, Anderson was considered the GOAT. He beat him. I don't think if you beat somebody, you're the GOAT. Whereas John Jones had already established that he was possibly the greatest of all time before he even met DC in the octagon. Mm-hmm. So it's a little different. I mean, if you lose to DC, you lose to a great fighter. That doesn't not make you the greatest. You know what I mean? Like Anderson and, GSP lost to Matt Serra. Okay. But he's still up top for the greatest of all time. So I don't think losing to DC would change the narrative on John Jones. I think the being popped is what changes the narrative for John Jones.
So, okay, couple ways we can go with that. One, so Tim, maybe he doesn't have a fight in the interim, but like you said, DC's about to retire. If Jones continues on, which he should, he's still young, and he goes on to lose, again, are we still considering him the greatest if he starts losing 1 or 2? And then are we still holding DC below him because DC specifically lost to him?
I think it'll be like TRTV tour where people will look back on it and go, man, prime John Jones, what if he wasn't a fuck up? Like almost like the Mike Tyson thing. What if he hadn't gone to jail? They'll be like, man, this is the tarnished John Jones. He doesn't fight enough. I think that's what the narrative will be told.
Right?
Will be excuses. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that that's necessarily fair. And I think in order to properly judge that, I'd have to see who he lost to and how.
Well, the reason I should say why I asked that question is if you listen to the MMA Hour this past week, Dominic Cruz did a great job of breaking down the fight. But he also broke down why DC loses to John Jones and what John Jones' strengths are. And you start to realize that DC has an advantage over nearly everyone he fights, especially at light heavyweight and heavyweight with his Greco-Roman wrestling. But John Jones has this very specific style that counters DC's style. So I guess what I'm essentially getting at is we know styles make fights. What if John Jones just happens to be DC's kryptonite, but DC beats everyone else, but then John Jones loses to people? Is it just that John Jones was DC's kryptonite, or is it that he's really that much of a better fighter than DC? Right now we can say he's a better fighter because he's not losing, but you know that eventually every fighter loses. And for DC to only lose to one fighter, and if John Jones goes and loses to one or two fighters,
I want to see what he does at heavy. I want to see what he does at heavyweight. I want to see, because what's cool is you're talking about, are they still tied together? And like, what's amazing is that somehow now DC has like literally taken his spot. Like, John Jones was last seen in the octagon calling out Brock Lesnar, and DC, like, it's that weird Batman Joker thing. He like repeated it. He called him out, and
absolutely.
And we can get into that, but he called him out, took his spot, and now he's getting his fight. And so now if they run into each other again, if he gets the Brock payday that Jones wanted, I mean, man, they are so tied together. It's insane. It's one of the
more so than any fighters
ever
in history.
It's
I mean,
so,
Tito Chuck are probably
it's probably passing that.
It's
isn't
passing
it?
that. Yeah.
If this fight it comes to fruition and DC gets this fight, I think this is the greatest, like, good versus bad, like, rivalry of all time. Basically.
Jones DC, you're saying?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Of anything.
Yeah.
Any sport, anything.
If
Shit, you can start comparing these to movies because you can't recreate this. This is real life.
Sure.
And like the movies create it just to be just like this, and they're actually living it. It's nuts.
And imagine, let's say, this isn't going to happen because I believe Cormier will wait for Brock and just sit for 6 months. But imagine,
I agree with
let's say he does this bullshit with Shogun. I can't even believe that's a conversation. It won't happen. But let's say he's saying he'd like to fight Shogun. But let's say he defends the 205 title, which I don't think will happen. Imagine if he defends that and he defends the heavyweight against Brock, and then John Jones comes back and is like, I want to fight you at heavyweight.
Mm-hmm.
You name it, your terms, let's do it. And he beats him again. I mean, that's so fucking heartbreaking for Cormier. His legacy's cemented. He'll go down as a champion, but I mean, he'll be such a clear 2 to John Jones. Yeah. It's devastating.
Yeah.
It'd be like if LeBron spent his entire career losing to the Warriors, and it's like, that's the greatest player ever, but he can't beat that one team ever.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it would just be like, God, he's so fucking good, but he can't beat John Jones.
Yeah.
But maybe. But what's awesome is, if you're him, do you beat Brock and call it a day, or is that competitor, is it that drive? Will he stay and risk it all? It's like going all in on a hand in poker. Do you risk all this last year and a half to go, I want to fight him a third time?
Yes.
You know, I think...
Yes, you do.
I think he does, because we said it in the DC episode. He said it in the Octagon after. He said, you know, I've come up to these moments and I've failed, right? The big time, it's time to show up, and he didn't show up. Now he showed up against Stipe. That's off his mind. I think he's a relaxed DC now. He doesn't have to worry about it. He has actual gold without that asterisk that you put on it, or that we put on it, because he got it from a strip John Jones. So he accomplished that. There's nothing necessarily for him to accomplish other than to beat John Jones, and I think he can be so focused on that instead of, you know, okay, this is another big time fight. Am I going to fail again? He already did it. So now I think he can, the emotions aren't going to get the best of him, and I think he can.
You're 100% right, and there's another thing that is really telling about DC, which is why he will take that fight, is DC is an honest individual. He was honest in the Octagon about his shortcomings. He's honest about, you know, exposing his feelings and crying in the Octagon. He will tell you honestly that he needs to get over that hump, that John Jones hump, or it will haunt him. He's not a dumb guy. He's got something already lined up after fighting, but he knows that will eat at him for the rest of his career. Mm-hmm. And he also knows he does not want to try and come back 3 years after being retired and fight John Jones because it's eating at him so much. He's a smart guy. He will 100% fight John Jones if John Jones is ready and available to fight him. Now, the real question, I hardly even want to ask this, but is there a chance he doesn't beat Brock Lesnar? I know it's good for the UFC either way. If Brock is champion, the UFC is as happy as they can be. If DC wins, they've got this rival fight. So the UFC wins either way. But is there a chance he loses to Brock?
Sure. I think when you're
I think 100% chance.
I think that he's the clear-cut favorite here, but when anytime you're dealing with somebody that big, I mean, DC was already undersized at heavyweight, and Brock is a monster.
Well, you look at you see how big Stipe was compared to DC, and Brock it towers Stipe. So it's like maybe not tall, but like Brock is a big guy. I think there is an absolute chance that he loses. I mean, it is wrestling. I don't know. Are we going to see? But here, what are we going to see, though? Are we going to see a Brock Lesnar lay on top of him like he did Mark Hunt?
Yes.
Or are we going to see Brock Lesnar, like, throw strikes?
No. You will see Brock Lesnar bull rush DC, and if he can get DC down
Which he
and
will.
Get on top of him,
he could.
That's
If DC's
dangerous.
wrestling is incredible. I mean,
It's
we know.
incredible.
We're not
It is
ignorant here.
incredible.
Yeah, we know.
But I have to say, like...
But Brock's got a different level. Even if
It's
DC
a
comes
weight
in
too,
heavy,
man.
well, it's not even that. If DC came in at the same weight, it's explosive power. Brock at 265 is not the same as DC at 265. DC's got power in his hands. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about just explosiveness in his movements. Brock carries 265 better than any other heavyweight
Easily.
carries 265.
The biggest thing is that for those people that have been keeping up with his run in WWE is he looks super out of shape. He was covered up very well in his suit and vest, but it makes zero sense because he's been out of the USADA testing pool. You would think he'd be jacked to the gills. He is not. Like he's just like soft. And a lot of wrestling fans have called it out like, oh, maybe he just doesn't care about wrestling, and that's fine, but he knows he's coming back. Why isn't he getting in better shape? I don't understand that at all.
It's confusing because
I'm
Cruz
very
said
confused.
he's definitely taking steroids. Some people
Yeah,
are saying the
you
fight's
think.
not even going to happen because they don't think he's going to pass the USADA
But then
testing.
why does he look so soft?
It's really weird because
And I
we've
agree.
seen guys that we
It's
know.
a recovery.
We've
It's a recovery thing. It's not a steroid to get yoked. It's a steroid just for... Because maybe he is... Brock's old, too, now. Brock
of
isn't
course.
like some young
course.
gun. So, like, it's going to be two old guys in the octagon, but it's not going to be a shit show. I don't think so.
No,
It's
it'll
gonna
be a
No.
great fight. Yeah,
That's what pisses me off about this is like you said, look, no matter which way you cut this, he has a chance. He has a legit
yeah.
chance to beat him. This isn't CM Punk. This isn't all that bullshit. So knock it off with the way that everybody's calling this WWE and that this is out of control and it ruined the night.
Dude, what made the UFC?
I know.
Feuds
I don't
like this.
How-
Hoist Gracie, Ken Shamrock,
From
Tito
day
Ortiz,
well, and
Chuck
again,
Liddell.
we tried to sell our listeners on CM Punk, and I don't care that he lost. I don't give a shit what happened after the fact. I stand by what we try to sell people on.
Why
CM
he's-
Punk
yes.
is good for the sport in this narrow little window when the sport really needs it. Not good long term, taking somebody's spot, whatever you want to say. It doesn't matter. The fact is, this, like you said, is not CM Punk. This is former heavyweight champion Brock Lesnar. This is a guy who less than 10 years ago had the belt around his waist.
Yep.
Let's not pretend like he doesn't belong here.
Mhm.
If you think the USADA thing should keep him away, then guess what? John Jones shouldn't get a fight with DC when he comes back. Stay
Right.
consistent,
Absolutely.
right? Let's stay
That's-
consistent.
That's spot on. That makes, you're exactly right. And when people, the way they're responding to that makes me sick. So one of the things I wanted to mention to you guys is I actually have heard on a podcast, they were saying that they said this is most likely not true, but you got to lay this scenario out here because this is exactly what happened with professional wrestling is there was a point in time where wrestling was not selling. Like wrestling used to be real. We've talked about it on this podcast and it wasn't selling. Things weren't going the way they wanted them to. You weren't just like UFC. You get your Conor run, you get your Ronda run. But wouldn't it have been great if like Nick Diaz had a UFC run? You know, there's things that if they could rewrite it, they would. And somebody speculated, and I think this is total fucking horseshit, but I want to hear your thoughts on it. That this is how it starts. Is that first it's Brock Lesnar and that staged handshake with Dana and just sitting down and I came out of the bathroom and he said, Brock's there. And I said, that's great. And it was like, whatever. And then he's in the cage. And it's like, oh, that was all set up for the camera, making it look like he's just there. And then he charges the cage. And then there's that setup where clearly DC knew he was there.
Yep.
And he's in on it. And this guy says, okay, so let's assume he told both of them. Because I think he told both of them. This guy even speculates they just told DC. And he goes, okay, what if the fix was in? The first part is, what if they start, maybe next time they tell Stipe to take a dive, okay? I don't think they did it. He goes, what if, in another version, not only do they tell Stipe to take a dive, but the next step is, they actually told Derek Lewis and Ngannou to lay a fucking egg. They said, nobody's going to want Brock to fight for the title, because they're going to want to see you, if Ngannou knocks out Derek Lewis, you guys put on the worst fight in heavyweight history, and they'll want a new challenger. And they said, then the next step is, does DC take a dive for Brock? And it becomes professional wrestling. And they said, this could be the first step, just like pro wrestling became rigged, to MMA becoming rigged. What do you think about that?
Well, I think that's a great story.
Yeah.
And
because ratings are down.
It's well put together.
It's a little
Mind
bit.
you, ratings are down like wrestling.
Here's what I'll say about that
Attendance
theory.
is down.
It's a little bit Da Vinci Code number 23 for me. It's a little bit like, if you're looking for it, you could find it kind of thing.
And for anybody, just so if you're looking for this, it's David Shoemaker's theory.
Yeah.
Okay, on the Masked Man podcast. He says himself it's very unlikely, but he said this is how it could start. So
I don't deny the possibility of something like this taking place. I just do not think that that's what happened in this specific instance.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great theory. I think that MMA athletes, unlike pro wrestling athletes, have a little too much pride in their profession, in the sense that,
even though there were fixed fights and pride,
we do
clearly,
yes, but I in that instance, I see it being more like boxing than WWE. So fixed fights is a little bit different than, you guys lay an egg, we'll have this guy come in, you take a dive, then we'll orchestrate that, then we'll move all these pieces around. I just see it more as like, here, you can make a quick payday, kind of like boxing. But I think you'd be hard pressed to get everybody in on it, like the WWE. Here's what I will say, though. I have no doubt, and we'll talk about this later in the show because I want to get to this, but I have no doubt that eventually this idea of, let's get everybody in the same uniform, let's be a professional sport, that thing will be a phase. I think we're going to go back to letting guys be individuals, come out in their own individual stuff, and a little more theatrics, a little more pageantry, a little more WWE flair, but we'll see more of a boxing model in the way fights and things are structured. So it's going to be kind of this collision of WWE and boxing, which it kind of already is.
Yep.
But I don't think it's going to it's going to form its own path. I don't think it's going to go one specific direction or the other.
I guess what's interesting about his note, and you could respond, Zach, is just, no matter whether it happens or not, that is how step one occurs. Is it would involve a pro wrestler in a stage scene, and the worst fight in heavyweight history is, it's not necessarily true. It's almost like when you're like looking for your favorite fighter to rebound, and you're like, well, this is what he would have to be saying right now if he is going to rebound. This is the first step in a scary trend. I don't believe it for a second, but I wanted to get your guys' thoughts.
I don't believe it either. The way I see it is, I think it was kind of genuine. I obviously Brock wanted to be there, and Dana, he flutters shit out his ass like nobody's business. But it's like, Brock called him, said, "Hey, I want to go to the fights." He's working things out with Vince. It's a business strategy. And the one thing that I caught was when he went up to Rogan and he says, "Hey, I want to be on your podcast." And Rogan's like, "Yeah, just call me anytime." That to me tells me that Rogan had no idea. That to me tells me that like nobody but maybe Dana White had an idea that Brock was going to show up. I mean, you hear the crowd when he walks out, it's going nuts. DC says it like, I saw Brock Lesnar. Like, no one told him he saw Brock Lesnar. And we didn't get to hear, Stipe's version because nobody's asking Stipe, "Oh, what'd you think of Brock Lesnar?" Because Stipe lost. Nobody cares. The reaction from Stipe when he, after he lost and he came out and he's like, he's a better man. Stipe has never changed his attitude towards anything. He's a blue collar guy. He's honest. He doesn't care. He's like, I'm going to go home. My wife's about to have our beautiful daughter and I'm going to, take some time off for that. Like nothing changed. Nothing was weird about Stipe. Nothing was weird. Like obviously in the press conference when, before this fight, when they said, what about Brock Lesnar? And they're talking and DC's his eyes light up. That's a genuine response. And guess what? He still had that same response when Brock was there. So everything has been genuine to me. If they're that good to play it for 6 months, then that's fucking kudos.
You hit it on the head there. As you were talking, that's what I kept thinking about is, you say they would bring in a pro wrestler. I don't think these MMA guys, bless their heart, man, they're great at fighting. They're not good at promoting. They're not good at acting. See, we know WWE is fake. So when guys can't spin a promo, when they can't do it, it's fine. We understand they're just not good at it. They can't act really well, but they're great at wrestling or whatever. If you don't know that it's fake and they're trying to convince you it is, they better be some damn good actors because we've seen some fights that are fixed and they look way obviously fixed.
Sure.
So not just acting inside the cage, but acting on the mic, things like that. Like you said, DC loves wrestling. I believe he could pull it off. Obviously, Brock's been in the business for years. I believe both of them could pull it off. But beyond those two, I don't know how many people besides your Connors, your very select few, could pull off convincing the masses that something is real when it's not.
Sure.
There's very few people capable
Just
of that.
to add one more thing, UFC can't hide anything. They've never been able to hide anything. So I don't think they're going to start with something this
And
big.
what are you saying too? And you guys totally read what I was saying correctly, and that was great stuff. But he's just saying this is step one.
Yeah, no.
And then maybe the next scenario, because maybe it doesn't play out in their favor. Maybe that night, Ngannou and Derek Lewis have the best fight ever, and Derek Lewis knocks him out dramatically, and everybody's like, Derek Lewis should get this fight. So maybe the next time they do it, they're like, you guys lay an egg in the co-main. Now we won't have a problem with fighter X getting that shot that we want to get that shot.
Here's the real problem, though. We're skipping over our man, Curtis Razor Blades.
Oh, God.
He's the real man.
He's throwing a fit. That's a whole nother...
Tim doesn't like his action on social media.
He just needs to hold the phone.
Yeah.
You got to understand.
That's the thing, though. So you feed him to... So him and Derek Lewis would be the next fight.
There's so many logical choices. And I want to say one closing question or thought on the Brock thing is just, why did no one throw a fit like this when John Jones called him out in the cage? Everyone was excited.
Because it's John Jones and nobody wants DC to be there.
Nothing has changed since he called him out in the cage and said, I want to fight Brock at Madison Square Garden or whatever it was.
It has changed. DC's the champion calling out. Brock was going to go up to heavyweight, not for a belt. I mean, Jones was going to go up to heavyweight, not for a belt. It was just going to be a fight.
That's the proper response. I didn't think about that. That's just a fight. So it's the title that's the problem, I guess.
That makes it worse to me. No, I mean, you're right. You're not wrong. To me, that would make it worse. Like, why are you tying up the light heavyweight champion going up and doing an exhibition fight against Brock when nothing is on the line? That seems crazy silly to me for John Jones to do that. When, like, DC just won the heavyweight belt. So I understand, again, Curtis Blades. I get it. If Curtis Blades is listening, get it. You deserve to be
Derek Lewis,
the next guy. But just bide your time because DC's almost out of there. Brock's definitely out of there. John Jones is not going to stay at heavyweight. Just bide your time, man. Win one more fight. Wait another 6 months, and you're going to get a title shot. Period.
We debated doing a segment, and I'm sure it'll reappear at some time, that whole 6 degrees of Conor McGregor.
Yes.
And DC has proven in the past year why that segment should exist, because he was at rock bottom in that cage a year ago, and what would he have to do? Well, this is it. John Jones would have to pop. He'd have to beat Volkan. He'd have to beat, here we are again. He just keeps winning the fights. Somehow beats Stipe.
Kane would have to stay injured.
Yes,
like
and
all these
all
things.
broke the right way. He's now getting his money fight and maybe beating Brock Lesnar. I mean, you can't even write this shit. It really is like WWE. It's crazy. But the point is look at what can happen
in 1 year time.
Exactly.
Literally was crying in the same octagon.
So to your point, the reason I'm bringing it up is if you're Curtis Blades, or if you're just hold on, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe this is your way to knock out a Derek Lewis and make your name even bigger.
Stay ready, because guess what? If Brock can't fight and John Jones is still suspended, maybe you'll get a DC fight. Who knows? Just stay on. Stay ready.
You're a young gun anyways. Like you just wait your
time. I think he's the youngest in the division.
Yeah,
he's only getting better.
And your title shot will be even bigger. If DC beats Brock, it's a bigger fight if you somehow get it.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Bide your time.
Well, and that's the other thing. I mean, I hate to say it, but we're in this proving ground state where these guys get the belts, like your GSPs, your Bispings, these older guys, they only want money fights, like Connor, Diaz, whoever. They only want money fights, and those money fights come when someone does something extremely impressive that draws the attention of the viewing public. It's unfortunate for the fighters, but we're no longer in that day and age where you just win X amount of fights and then you're next in line. So if you do want to fight DC in a money fight, go knock out Derek Lewis in the first round, plant him face down on the canvas,
call out DC,
grab the mic, call out DC, you might have your fight.
Because that's the thing. So many of these fighters get on the mic afterwards and say they don't have anything to say. DC killed it. And Brock did too.
Absolutely.
We left Saturday night so excited. Anybody that says otherwise, fuck off. That was an amazing moment. Sorry it got a little bit too theatrical for you, but that is what the sport needs.
Yeah, if you're one of those guys that thought that was corny and cheesy, what do you want? Do you want DC to get on there and go, It's great that I won. Thanks to my coaches. Thank you, fans, for showing up. See you later. Good night. Give me a break. He just knocked out the heavyweight champion in the first round, and Brock Lesnar's in the audience. That would have been a snooze fest.
I'm going to tell you right now, my phone was blowing up that night. 0 of those texts said, I can't believe DC beat Stipe. And they probably should have, right? But they were all from casual fans, and they were all about Brock and Cormier.
Going nuts.
And the phone didn't blow up after 225. You know what I mean?
Yep, absolutely.
So what's funny is it actually blew up about 225 about CM Punk, but we can't talk about that, right?
Yeah, we're not allowed to talk about that.
It's just, that's how you get the casuals involved.
You know what would have made the call out of when DC beat Rumble and John Jones is in the crowd? John Jones getting up and going in the octagon. Yep. Like making those call outs and being interactive, and like Brock getting up, going into the octagon just makes it that much bigger. We're sitting on the couch in here going nuts.
Yep.
Like, that was fantastic.
You know what else it does? Here's what else it does when something like that happens. I show my wife, and my wife goes, whoa, that guy is huge. Yeah. Talking about Brock Lesnar. DC's so small. They're actually going to fight each other? Yes, they are. Holy crap.
Yeah.
She wants to see that fight because they're standing next to each other in the cage. If I just tell her, yeah, DC won this amazing fight and he called out Brock Lesnar. Who's Brock Lesnar? Oh, he's just it does not have the same effect, guys. It really doesn't.
Do you like the assholes that are like, he's actually not allowed to be in the cage because he's not out of his suspension yet? That's a thing. You know, that's a thing.
Break.
Fuck off. Do you not care about the sport you love?
I don't think people realize.
And guess who's going to take care of it?
Yeah,
the UFC.
UFC. What the fuck?
All right, so let's move on from DC and Brock. We've got a ton of other stuff to talk about. I guess so. We can talk about Ngannou. We can talk about T-City. We'll make those quick, and then we'll move on to Schaub and Dana and what's going on there.
So we sort of talked about Ngannou a little bit. I mean, Derek Lewis is what it is. His back was hurt. He did just enough. But what about Ngannou? I guess is kind of the interesting one.
You know, boring fights. Everyone's, boo this, boo that. We were expecting a slugfest. But guess what? In the first 2 rounds, what were we saying? Nobody should be booing. You know why? Because this is intense as fuck.
Super tense.
I get it. The 3rd round, nothing was thrown. You know, I think it was Goddard who was... Oh, no, Herb. He was like, you guys need to throw something or I'm going to, start taking points away for backing up. Great. That is fantastic. I loved it.
Good reffing. Yep.
But what happens is in the first round, we hear a little clip of Derek Lewis say something, and then all of a sudden we agree. We're like, oh shit, his back's hurt. And then a round later, Rogan's like, his back's fucked.
Mm-hmm.
And what were we saying before the fight? Not playing some we called it thing, but literally we were upstairs going. As Derek Lewis fans, I'm like, I hope his back's okay. His back is notoriously an issue, and he just wants to fight and make his money. He'll take fights hurt.
And we're fans, but we're fans of Ngannou too. But we're not making excuses for Lewis. The problem is Lewis had a back issue,
and he was
backing up, and he was still throwing stuff.
Yeah, that's the real thing.
But Ngannou, what the hell? We're sitting there talking about it. Okay, is he scared of like being taken down? And he comes out and he says it. He's like, I've been, I'm scarred from the last fight. I didn't.
I'm glad he said that. That's big for him to admit that. Because I don't see how it's anything other than a fixed fight or him being afraid. There's zero other reason for him not to throw a punch. It's crazy. He wasn't being pressured. There was not really a threat. Derek Lewis doesn't take anyone down.
No.
So he's literally watching out for Derek Lewis's right hand. And Derek Lewis is visibly in pain and backpedaling. There is no reason Ngannou shouldn't have smashed. I hate to say that because we really do like Derek Lewis a lot. There's no reason Ngannou shouldn't have smashed him.
Pressed forward and just went at it.
It was just all in. It was a Uriah Hall case. I mean, it was just all in his head. He was gun shy.
So Luke Thomas said, and again, I don't necessarily agree with this, but I found it interesting. He said that he thinks some blame should go on Ngannou's corner for letting Ngannou go out for the 5th round against Stipe after getting smashed in the 4th round 10-8. I don't agree with this because I believe that Ngannou was always dangerous. He's one of those guys, especially in your heavyweight title fight. And at that point, everyone believed he was the scariest man in the world.
I didn't even know that was in question.
Just he said at that point, after you get smashed in the 4th round, you protect him from himself. Because then he goes out in the 5th round and just gets hit more and more. And then you start to damage him.
But wouldn't that do more to his ego?
That's a good point.
We just
like throwing the towel, essentially.
Oh, we doubt your abilities in the 5th round?
I disagreed with it.
That's going to take away all of his self-confidence.
I agree with that.
I definitely think that 4th round is very damaging to his career. And look, but see, that's the thing is, all these people like Conor, he gets embarrassed by Nate Diaz. Everyone thought he was going to smash Nate Diaz, and you find out the true champions with how they respond. It's like we talked about with the Ronda thing. She never responded well. Look, Ngannou's next fight, biggest fight of his career, because clearly he's messed up. Go fix yourself. People said instead of the MMA beat, he should have had a tune-up fight. I think you could argue, and I love Derek Lewis, that was a big step down. Derek Lewis takes a lot of damage in his fights, but he throws fucking bombs.
Yeah, and he's not a wrestler, like we said.
It's perfect,
I think it was a step down, too, because that was based off buzz, and that was based off Derek Lewis going on shows saying, fuck this guy and whatever. That was a step down. I'm not saying Derek Lewis isn't the top of the top, but he's clearly hurt. And, I mean, no offense to Mark Hunt, but yeah, like Mark Hunt's not going to win the title anytime soon.
Well, you bring up a good point there, too, is Ngannou had all the motivation to beat Derek Lewis.
Yeah.
I mean, those two have been feuding for a long time now, and he finally gets that fight and doesn't throw a punch in it. He's ludicrous.
So messed up right now.
I mean, something is really, really psychologically wrong in that case. It's not just a case of like, oh, he was just a little messed up by Stipe. I mean, he really wasn't throwing a single punch the entire fight against a guy he claims to despise.
And that's why Joe Rogan is such a phenomenal announcer, because he has the balls to just say flat out on the broadcast he needs to go see a sports psychologist.
Yes.
Which, people won't touch on stuff like that, but clearly his head's messed up,
All right, so you bring up Joe Rogan. I want to talk about Rogan just for a second, and this will segue into a Dana White Schaub conversation. I was listening to Rogan's podcast, and where you listen to the broadcast and you realize how much Rogan loves the sport, how much he talks about and champions the sport. And then I started thinking about how many people listen to Rogan's podcast that don't really follow MMA closely, but have, had an interest in MMA because of Joe Rogan. How important is Joe Rogan to the UFC, and not just as a commentator, but just as someone who's always talking about mixed martial arts being the greatest sport in the world? With his reach and his influence, is he the most important figure in mixed martial arts.
Right? Are we when we say figure? Are you ruling out fighters like Conor and stuff like that?
Well, no, I'm including them. Is he more influential and important than Conor McGregor to mixed martial arts?
I think the only person who is more influential than Joe is Conor.
Okay.
I would say this: in a world where things like Twitch and podcasts are like replacing cable TV and typical radio, your standard radio, terrestrial radio, I should say. I think that someone who hosts one of the top 3 podcasts in the world, who's constantly championing your sport and talking about their love for your sport and explaining the nuances and why people should be watching, I don't think there's any doubt that when he steps down from broadcasting, and maybe if he slowly stops talking about it on his podcast or whatever, maybe he just separates it out completely with the MMA podcast so less people hear it. Because I think you and I actually talked specifically that on a couple of his standard episodes, he has not been talking about 226.
He has not.
If it's separated out and you're talking one of the top 2-3 podcasts in the world and he isn't talking about it, it absolutely hurts. There's millions of people listening to this, and if you don't think he's not getting them interested when he's talking about Cormier Stipe all the time, and eventually you hear it enough, you're like, I kind of want to see this. It reminds me of watching boxing when I was little, and these people that don't watch MMA, I think it's absolutely helping the buy rates that are already hurting.
The reason I say Conor is more influential is because we've seen the impact of Conor. We haven't seen the impact of Joe leaving or Joe not having that influence. We've seen Conor leave, and look what it's done. Like, the sport can't go anywhere north of 500,000 buys, and Conor's nowhere to be seen. Now, does Joe Rogan have that same effect? He might. He might. But I don't know that because we just haven't seen it yet.
Well, here's what I would say. I don't think Joe has as much impact in a dynamic sense that Conor McGregor does, where you're going to see this dramatic change in viewership. But what I do think is long term, he's more important to the sport. Conor's bringing a bunch of eyes to the sport, but then they're turning around and not tuning back in until Conor fights.
True.
Joe Rogan, like Tim said, is educating people on the sport. People that think the sport is barbaric, and they listen to Rogan's podcast, and he's explaining the subtleties and the ways that the rules are, and that it's not so barbaric. Then these people are gradually getting introduced to the sport. And let's not forget, Rogan's been doing this for a long time. Conor has not, nor will Conor continue. He's already got one foot out the door.
True.
As far as impact on the sport of mixed martial arts, I don't know if there's anyone that is more important to the sport than Joe Rogan is. And the reason that that's worth discussing is because Rogan is on his way out. And who knows how long he's going to keep doing his podcast. Or like Tim said, maybe he divides it and does just an MMA podcast. And then people are like, well, I don't want to tune in to hear him talk about just MMA.
Yeah.
We may not see it drop 200,000, pay-per-view buys when he does, but we might see this slow trickle away from the sport that's already scary in the way that it's suffering. So it's not a good thing. I'm scared.
I think a lot of these fans get too busy caught up in his announcing style and the fact that all he does is yell and he's a stoner and this and that's all they fucking say is they rip him for saying he's high half the time, which just isn't even fucking true. But they're forgetting what an ambassador he is for the sport and what he does outside of the cage. You may not like his style, whatever. Some people miss Mike Goldberg, some people don't, right? But the sport's going to miss Rogan, period, when he steps 100%. Away. So he should, if he's not going to announce, and he would never do it, I'm about to propose because he has so much fuck you money, but he should be, UFC Unfiltered should be Joe Rogan's show. He'll always have the Joe Rogan experience, but he should be hosting that show. All his fans should be coming over from his podcast. He should be the face of the UFC's podcast, and he should just do basically the Joe Rogan MMA show under the UFC's banner and get the top fighters in there on his terms and watch what happens.
Actually be unfiltered.
Do real interviews with these guys, not these softball questions that Dana approves.
That's a good point, and that segues us into this. Is it time for the UFC? This pay-per-view came and went, 400 pay-per-view buys. The one before it in Chicago, 250. That's $650 for two of the biggest cards of the year. $650 combined for two of the biggest cards of the year.
Wow.
Is it time for we talk on this podcast ad nauseum about promotion, about telling fighters stories, but there's more to this decline in viewership than that. Is it time for the UFC to hit the reset button, to dump USADA, to dump Reebok, to dump Dana White? And the reason I say dump Dana White, I know he's got one foot out the door as well, but I think they need to just part ways with him. Zach and I were discussing earlier the Schaub incident. Okay.
Can't wait to get to that.
And we can talk about Schaub and his side of things and how ridiculous he went over the line. But I was telling Zach, what's not being talked about a lot here is that the face, the president, the head of an organization like the UFC is jabbering on social media with a former fighter.
Now, we have to be consistent because he did shit like that even in his prime.
Of course he did. Of course he did.
But that's
one of his.
All in.
But that's the thing, though. That's not one of his strong suits. Even if he was doing it earlier, the point is, you would not, see Jeff Bezos on social media bitching about some former employee and going back and forth about things. It's just a really, really bad look for your sport. It is a bad look.
But no one, it'd be his dark side. It's the negative with Dana when he's nailing it. When he's out promoting fights, killing it, it was okay. The problem is now you're not getting as much as the good with the bad. Because that was always his thing, is we just use the phrase unfiltered. He was unfiltered.
Yes.
He would tell it like it is. He would stand up, because ultimately he's standing up for his current fighter against a former fighter. Now we know there's more to it than that.
There's a lot more to it. We know that there's personal
I just think that
there.
When you don't have as much of that positive with it, the negative shines brighter. And now it's like, okay, you're not really giving us your A game and you're still pulling this shit. Because he's always done stuff like this.
He has always done stuff like this, but then he's also been the guy that we have said time and time again, even though he's honest and he's unfiltered, you can't trust a word that comes out of his mouth because he always lies about everything. So even trying to spin that as a positive doesn't even work, because his honest, unfiltered version of himself is a whole bunch of crap too. And don't get me wrong, I'm not missing what Dana White's impact is on the sport. We were just talking about Joe Rogan. I understand how important Dana White was for the sport, but it is time to part ways with Dana White. We are holding on to something that we need to let go of.
Well, why are you so focused on Dana, though, when I think the bigger issues are things like USADA and the Reebok shit?
I'm only focused on Dana as it pertains to this Schaub incident. It was just a reminder to me of the downfalls of Dana White and just the whole mentality and the whole culture, everything that we've got going on here. Again, you guys may not realize it, you listening at home, if you're a hardcore MMA fan, you may not understand or realize this, but go talk to the average person on the street. Ask them what they think about MMA. A lot of them still think it's very barbaric and it's a bunch of meatheads. And when your president is acting like a meathead, it is not a good look for the sport.
I'll say this. I understand as an employer, I understand why it happened, though, because his former employee is putting out videos shitting on his current employee, and the employer came out to defend his guy. Did he do it in the best way possible? Not really. No. Should he have done it in the platform he did? No. But where else was he supposed to do it? We have to propose that. And he's defending his employer, his current employee. That's admirable. For some people would think that's admirable.
Okay, but would any other president do that?
Okay, so he's just supposed to hang his guy out to dry and not defend his current employees?
No, but you can make a statement to the public.
I'm not saying it's the best thing to do. I'm just saying I don't think this is the worst thing Dana White's ever done. I think Brendan Schaub is the one that took it too far.
But that's the thing. Dana's entertaining that. And that's where you just have to draw the line and be like, I'm not even going to entertain this because this is nonsense.
So you don't defend your current guy
to it. No, you do.
But hold on. But he's a promoter, and his style bender is could be one of the next big stars, right? So he's defending one of his assets right now. He's one of the next big
Stylebender's got his own problems on social media.
Right,
but...
right. That's a whole nother thing. But you know what I mean?
Yes.
We come on here all the time and say we defend CM Punk because we're supposed to promote and sell pay-per-views. Stylebender, Schaub is putting out videos questioning people of similar ilk, and you could possibly group in Stylebender with what he was doing, the whole thing he was saying. But isn't it Dana's job to step in and go, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. This guy's amazing. The problem is the way Dana does it.
That's it.
Because the promoter should do that.
Right, but in the right format, the right circumstance, not jumping on social media when you're angry and steam's coming out of your ears. That's just, we all know. Like, look, if your wife pisses you off and you're fuming, chances are if you go to her right that moment and start yelling, it's not going to end well. It's for anybody.
So your issue is how he does it.
Yes,
like you don't have an issue with him posting on Instagram or whatever and fighting back for his guy. It's the way
it's just got to be professional. Dana has just lost professionalism along the way, time and time again. And again, when that's one of the knocks on the sport, that you got wrestlers coming over, it's barbaric, it's meatheadish, it's this, it's that, and they want to be professional by slapping a Reebok uniform on everybody or bringing in USADA. It just doesn't. It's so inconsistent. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
So anyway, I think that's just one of the issues to hit the reset button on. We all know about Reebok, so we won't go into that. But what about USADA? Is it time to call it quits with USADA? Is USADA a black eye on the sport?
Well, I have a lot of issues with USADA, but I mean, we've talked ad nauseum about USADA on the podcast. I mean, look, I don't know if you want to talk about what Barnett's been saying recently, but like they're just fucking up left and right. I think that the purposes, obviously, what the goals are amazing, but I feel like when you listen to stuff like Robert Whitaker talk and he explains the loopholes, and GSP talks about the loopholes that people like Yoel Romero can capitalize on, where I get 2 strikes, I can say, hey, I'm at my house and just head on off to Cuba and hang out with the wrestling team for a month, and maybe they don't test me. And if they do, whoops, forgot to say I was here. And you use shit that's out of your system in 72 hours, and then you hear Whitaker talk about how strong Yoel was, and you're like, I'm not really sure USADA's helping too much. And then you hear about the shit they're dragging people through, because I'm guilty as charged. I think Barnett, I thought he pissed hot again because his track record's fucking terrible.
Yeah.
And look, on Rogan, his answers, they're exactly what he would have to say if he pissed hot again. That's exactly what he would say. But then you start to question it, and you really start to question USADA, and you're like, maybe he is telling the truth. So I don't know anymore. I really am starting to wonder if it's time to change the program.
Z-Pain, you think it's time to get rid of USADA, or you like what they're doing?
I think, well, if they're gonna, you can't half-ass it. So if you're gonna come in guns blazing and want to change the sport and make it cleaner, then you got to stick to it. There can't be, like you say, those loopholes. There can't be the holes where, someone like Yoel can say, oh, I forgot to tell you where I was, or fucking John Jones hiding underneath the octagon.
Oof.
You have to be, you have to be like police. It's like a fucking search warrant. Oh, we know John Jones is here. Where the fuck is he? Mm-hmm. Find him. We're not leaving until he comes out, whatever. So it's like, okay, but there are those ways out, and people are starting to figure it out. Yeah, sure, it was great in the beginning. Everyone's getting popped. Nobody knew what to do. Guess what? It's been around 3 years, and now people know how to get around it. It's no different than, think of your first job. It's no different than, oh yeah, I can clean this because this looks good, and I can maybe half-ass this, and it might not look as good, but that's okay because this is spotless. Instead of doing both of them like you're supposed to, you do one way and then the other, and you get away with it. You learn these things in anything.
They know.
In anything.
The fighters know the loopholes.
Not just that. They're not just finding loopholes. There has been a dramatic change, and I don't know why until recently. Luke Thomas made the parallel. We made the parallel in our conversations, a couple weeks ago. And I guess it's been said before, but the injuries have increased dramatically since USADA came in. Guys are getting injured way more often. But the crazy part is when you hear guys talk about their training, they're sparring not nearly as hard as they used to. Our education on fighting and training is way up from what it used to be. Our education on nutrition is way up. But yet we're having more missed weight, fights. We're having more injuries than ever before. How does that work? Typically, you don't have more of a knowledge in something and then have a negative result. So there is a factor here, and USADA seems to be that factor. Guys that could take HGH and prevent injury, or take an IV or take whatever it was, they're no longer allowed to do that, and we're losing fights, and we're losing pay-per-view buys, and we're losing the sport.
And I also, in these situations like we're talking about right now, you think about what you would say to your friends, you think about what you would say in public, but then ultimately I think about myself, and I think about Josh Barnett's next fight. If it had been in the UFC, I would not have given a shit about it. But now, if he fights in Ryzen or somewhere where I know he gets to be on the sauce again, just like Chael, just like Vanderlei, just like Frank Mir, I get more excited. Mm-hmm. If Anderson Silva went to Bellator, I'd be like, ooh, he can do whatever he wants to.
100%.
And I hate myself for thinking that, but that's the honest truth. And then I'm like, maybe I ultimately don't care about USADA as much as I think I do. The only part of me that will never go away is things like Michael Bisping's eye. That is not right. Yep. A cheating Vitor did that to him. He's damaged for the rest of his life.
Now, if that had happened and it was allowed, if Vitor wasn't, quote, cheating, would you have had a problem with it? If they're allowed
then
to be on steroids.
Then it's like my relationship with the NFL, where I really have to decide if I want to watch what I'm watching. Do I want to watch guys helmet to helmet? Where I have to negotiate with myself every Sunday how I feel about people torpedoing each other helmet to helmet, and then playing again a week later. Mm-hmm. Whereas the UFC, they go away for 6 months. I have to think about that when I'm watching football. I think if I know they're all in the sauce, I'd really have to debate in my head, okay, do I want to see this? I think the answer would be yes.
And let's be clear here. It's not an all or nothing thing. It doesn't have to be a 0 tolerance or a 100% tolerance. There could just be certain allowances. Again, guys can't even take ibuprofen.
Yeah.
Or things for sinus infections. They can't take an IV to rehydrate. I know that through those things you can sneak things in, but they're sneaking it in now. To me, it's the argument of like legalizing marijuana or legalizing drugs in general. It's like you're policing the shit out of drugs, and they're still getting in. There's still all these gangs. There's still all these cartels. There's still all the jail time and money and taxes and all this shit. And you're policing it harder than ever. It's obviously not working. So policing the steroids still isn't working, but it's having more of a negative effect than it is a positive effect.
I think it becomes annoying. Like USADA to me is becoming more annoying because shit like this is drawn out. Like John Jones is still appealing his thing. Okay, like you pop, dude. So have it like that. Like you can't appeal. Sorry. If you pop, you pop. Sorry. It's just the way it is. I get it. There are some you can investigate, and there are some situations where maybe someone switched a sample. Investigate that. Cool. But if you pop and you've had a history of popping, maybe not for the same thing, but you still did, sorry, you're done for a year. That's it. No ifs, ands, or buts.
This drawn out shit is ridiculous.
It's annoying.
The John Jones, Barnett, all these
dude.
JDS. I think he's now. It's technically considered a tainted supplement, so he's okay. But he's been out for 2 years. It's just this bullshit that doesn't happen in other sports.
It's nuts.
The NFL does a masterful job of releasing that shit on like Friday nights and just saying like, 4-game suspension. Yep. Whatever. Cushing's out. He's gone, and then nobody knows about it. Comes back, good to go. What's the Patriots receiver they just got? I don't know if it was Edelman.
Yeah.
Just,
3-game suspension.
He'll be back. No one. Week 8, no one will be talking about it. Nobody. And the UFC, it's this 2-year project.
Yeah, and it's drawn out. It's like, first offense 1 year, second offense 2 years, third offense 4 years.
I don't even know who does the drug testing for the NFL. That's probably a good thing. I shouldn't know.
Yeah,
it should just be like, hey, we got this guy. He's out for a year.
Exactly.
Final ruling. He wants to appeal it. He's out. Like the Edelman thing has already played out. He lost his appeal.
Yeah.
He's suspended. It's like, cool. That's all.
They do it within like a week. All this stuff, you know what they do is like the fighters are getting their defense attorneys ready, like, okay, this is what I did, this is what I did, this is what I did. So let's make it seem like I got like tainted with something else.
Yep.
Like it's stupid.
How about giving the fighters the option? How about the GSP I'm drawing a blank on his name. Who did GSP fight before he left?
Jay Hendricks.
Hendricks. How about a GSP Hendricks situation where they have to agree and then it's in the contract? So, hey,
Even
we're
that
going to
was a
be,
disaster.
well, it was in that particular case because it had never been done before, really. But how about if the UFC says, okay, here's WADA, here's USADA, here's this. You guys check which ones you want to use for this, and if you both leave them blank, if Vitor is fighting Barnett and they want to leave them all blank, have at it, boys. You agreed, you signed on the dotted line, you take the risk of getting your eye kicked out of your head, whatever, fine, you agreed to that, you signed for it, there you go.
That's a thing though, and that's where I think, kind of where we started this thing. You go on the street and people think, no, it's a barbaric. I think the sport becomes more barbaric if that's out in the open like that. Oh, these guys agreed to fight on the sauce. Okay,
they're agreeing to fight in a cage. They're agreeing to everything else when they sign on it. That's why you have a bout agreement.
But then I feel like
to everything.
I feel like it turns in, instead of like a chess match where you have a striker or a wrestler or like a BJJ practitioner who is like phenomenal. It's not to me, it's no longer, okay, is he going to sneak in a triangle here like Anthony Pettis did at Michael Chiesa? Or is this, oh, they agreed to no testing. Oh, so it's just gonna be a fucking slugfest. Who's gonna knock each other out first?
No, well, not necessarily, because steroids aren't just like marking up on power.
Exactly.
But that's the thing. You're also, it's not necessarily everybody's gonna go, oh, we don't want to be tested. It's just, as a matter of fact, I wonder if you still kind of keep the same thing where people don't want their perception to be ruined. So they're still like, yeah, I'll do WADA. Will you? Yeah, you will too? Okay, so I guess we're both doing it,
Two things. One, remember, if you start playing by those rules where the fighters pick and choose what they're doing, you get the Floyd Mayweather boxing rules, where he's like, okay, cool, you're going to test me the minute I sign for the fight. Handshake agreement, we're fighting September 5th, and I'm signing that shit August 1st. Sure. Floyd's fights get signed off on where he can cycle off his shit.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Two, I just want to say something, because I know we're going to run short on time. To all the MMA fans out there, is we're sitting here talking about USADA. We're talking a lot about WWE. And you guys, everybody hates both of them, right? They want a clean sport. They don't want it to be fake. They don't like fixed fights. Just remember, you all love Pride. It was fixed fights. It was open. They were openly juicing. Just remember what you really loved. Be honest with yourself. It's like, that's what I'm talking about when I say I want to see Barnett in Bellator. I want to see Barnett in Ryzen. I wanted Shane Carwin to come back in Ryzen too, because I was like, cool, he can cheat again. It's fun to watch, right? Just remember what you love, what you're nostalgic for, and figure out what your priorities really are.
Well, and play out what scenario you're calling for. Play that out. Play it to its in your head. Play out this super regulated, clean sport where the next guy in line gets to fight. Nobody's allowed to be an individual. We don't have any showmanship. And the guys just walk down to the ring, clean and sober, fight each other, and then the next guy in line gets to fight. Tell me how that played. Just go see a regional show if that's what you want.
Yep.
Let's go watch a regional show.
Well, look at the guy, Conor McGregor, throwing dollies at buses, causing scenes, throwing shit at press conferences. He breaks the rules. He does whatever he wants to. That's the guy everybody wants to see, right? I mean, he's unpredictable. That's what you actually want. I'm not saying we need cheating. I'm just saying.
This makes me think, I think it was Jordan Peterson on Rogan's podcast who was saying, like, people always talk about equality and fairness, and I'm botching this. This is, my take on it. But they're saying they want all this. And then he said, but what music do you listen to? You listen to what's on the radio. You listen to the top 1% of 1% of musicians. What sports do you watch? You watch the 1% of the 1% of athletes. You're watching the best of the best of the best. You people asking for this strict, set of rules and this stuff. Are you guys out watching regional shows? Are you guys, like, would you really support what you're actually asking for? Or are you one of those guilty pleasure people that's enjoying this stuff, but then you're jumping on social media and calling for all this other stuff? Be honest with yourself.
Yep.
Like, are you really that stand up, honorable? I want my martial artist to be this way and this way only. Are you following that in every other aspect of your life?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe you are, but I would say take a self check and figure that out. Last thing before we go.
Yeah, we can't do an MMA podcast this week and talk this much about Brendan Schaub, Dana White, all these stars. We have to talk about the Eskimo Brothers thing for like 5 minutes. Can we just please?
2 minutes.
So
let's go with
the
it.
quick recap. Obviously, Stylebender gets upset about Schaub's comments. Dana White chimes in. Brendan Schaub then comes out with a rebuttal. They go back and forth. Well, the final rebuttal by Schaub insinuates that Dana White and Ronda Rousey have had some type of sexual relationship, and basically said this isn't how Eskimo brothers treat each other. So now, a lot to go over there. The TMZ one is to go over the Dana Ronda thing and whether that's professional, what that means, what that means about the way she was promoted. I mean, you can go over that forever.
Yeah.
Or do I get to shit on Brendan Schaub for being a fucking piece of shit?
Do we know he's talking about Ronda?
If you have, let's be honest with ourselves.
He's not talking about Brian Callen because I feel like they both probably slept with.
You've
Callen.
been waiting the whole podcast.
I have not. No, but I mean, yeah, it's almost universally understood that he's talking about Ronda.
Just because she's the biggest out of that, and he's been outspoken about dating her.
Sure.
We did an episode on him, and one of the main points in the end was about his ego. He has a huge ego, and it was so interesting to me to see the minute it was all okay. He handled it all well, and the minute his success and how he got there came up, he immediately tried to tear Dana down and how he got successful, and then he he basically drags Ronda into the headlines, who's now on the next phase of her career, remarried, stepkids. Leave her alone.
I am against Ronda the fighter 100% just because of how she was one of my favorite fighters and how she treated everyone after those losses. But as a person, dude, she is married. She has a family. She has moved on to another career and kind of like
reinvented herself.
Exactly. Where she's becoming a superstar, and you bring her back into this mess after all of this just because you're pissed off that Dana White just schooled you. Like,
yep.
Well, you can send. That's the thing.
Do that.
You got Dana White's number. Maybe you're blocked. Send it from somebody else's phone. You can send him that message privately and say, "Hey, man, don't make me call out this shit. I'll go public with this. Fine. You want to, be that petty? Go for it. But do it privately." He knew damn well. Don't even sugarcoat it or code it. You know everybody's gonna assume it's Ronda.
Exactly.
You putting that on social media, you know exactly what you're doing, and it was a bad call on Schaub's part.
Can you name one other fighter in MMA right now who's talked about fucking another fighter? Who they fucked? Who they've had sex with?
No.
Why is Brendan Schaub not only
hear about things, but it's not the fighter talking about it?
Brendan Schaub continuously does it, and now he's talking about who she's had sex with while she's moved on and dragging her down into the shitty headlines. TMZ runs with it. That guy's ego is out of fucking control, and it's all because he got upset because basically Dana's like, "Yeah, you wouldn't be anywhere if it weren't for Rogan."
And I think we said it on his episode. That is true.
That's absolutely
Granted,
true.
His work ethic is crazy,
for sure,
but it's not what you know; it's who you know. And he happens to know one of the best podcasters in the world, and he created his own content, and people like him. I get it; people like him. But you take Joe Rogan out of the situation, who's there?
I still stand by. They're both out of line.
I agree.
I think it's ridiculous.
But Dana White didn't bring someone else into it.
I think it went too far. Dana White defending his employee was good. I think it went too far when he said, "Okay, without Joe Rogan, you're
agreed.
It's his personal vendetta.
You end it with you just got knocked out. How are you going to talk about somebody when you've been knocked out like 4 out of 6 times or whatever? You end it at that.
Just
and
say,
that's cool.
Brendan Schaub, you're a fighter. You know how this stuff works.
Why
are you ripping this guy? Do you have nothing better to do? I mean, put it in Schaub's court and ask him, like, hey, why are you even doing this, man? Like, make Schaub look like a piece of shit by questioning his motives. But if you start just laying into him with a personal vendetta, to me, that has crossed the line. My boss and I would never go at it on social media because it would be absolutely ridiculous.
Let's not forget.
I mean, it's ridiculous.
Let's not forget Dana's ego is out of control too.
It is, but
Sure.
you see, Dana didn't affect other people. What Brendan Schaub did was fuck with Dana's. What Dana did had nothing. Doesn't affect Brendan Schaub's family life at all.
Sure.
Doesn't affect Rogan.
Schaub made it personal. He went after Dana's. Dana's married. That fucks with his marriage, his kids. Okay.
Mhm.
So that could have
His
kids
who
with,
are old
they
enough
could,
to kind of
know
understand.
what
now
that is.
it's very likely that his wife knows what's going on and is okay with it. But if that leads to a marriage, now there are kids growing up without a father in their home. You're a fucking piece of shit. If Travis Brown, who is documented, maybe has some anger issues, maybe the charges are dropped, but I don't know. If he gets upset about this and freaks out, maybe that household's fucked up. Dana White didn't cause problems in households. Brendan
That's
Schaub
fair.
is a scumbag and did.
That's
okay?
fair. Yeah.
Never forget that. He did
Absolutely.
that all because he got upset for a second and fucking post that.
Yep.
Classless.
Absolutely.
So we skipped the T-City. And,
Yeah.
and I
we
know
did.
and I'll just do it 10 seconds, whatever. I know people are, and I don't know where, actually we haven't talked about this, but I don't know where you guys stand, but with T-City, listen, I commend him for sticking up for himself. He earned that shot, and he wants that shot. But here's to the people who don't agree with it and call him this, call him that, don't think he deserves it. T-City, Brian Ortega got that shot on the same shit that he just turned down. So Frankie, we all commend Frankie Edgar. Didn't need to take that fight. He got slept. And then, Brian Ortega's the next guy. What happens if Jeremy Stevens goes in there and does the same thing that Ortega? Ortega becomes a nobody. He doesn't have the reputation Frankie does. He doesn't have that respect yet. I think Frankie doesn't lose that because of the respect, how long he's been there, of the reputation he's built. Ortega, I think he loses that, and he has to win 2 fights before he gets back to the top.
Do you think it's his responsibility to almost pay it back? That he's in his position because Frankie Edgar is a company man? Does he owe it to the company to do it for them? To step up and say, you know what, short notice fight, Holloway can't fight.
Got to be
fight
something in the
Stevens.
contract. Got to be a clause for the reason Zach's stating, because I was thinking the same thing. I was like, dude, what a piece of crap. He got in that position because somebody else did that. He owes it to the UFC, to the fans, to everybody to take that fight. But Zach, you bring up really good points, man. Frankie was the guy who beat BJ Penn. He was the guy who was a champion. He's
responsible for some of the greatest
he
fights
has
ever.
You're right, he has that. He can take that fight and know that if he loses, he's still only a fight or two away. This is Ortega's first, and who knows if only, shot at this belt. You can't fuck around with a hard hitter like Jeremy Stevens. I actually never considered that, so that's a really good point, and I agree with you. If he's going to pay it forward for the UFC's sake, there needs to be something in that contract. If you lose, you need to win one more fight, and you're right back in there.
Pay it forward, not 2 days. Do it in a couple months.
You guys manage people, correct?
Yes.
If you took care of an employee for a long time and you everything they needed, whatever, and then they rise up to a position of power because of what you did for them, like you helped them out in a spot, whatever, you gave them an opportunity to succeed. A big corporate person was coming out, whatever, you put them out there and they succeeded, and then now you need their help one time, and you're like, listen, it's because of us that you're here. I need your help one time. And they're like, nah, I'm good. I don't want to fuck up. I don't want
if they said that, obviously that'd be different. But if they said, I want to help you, but if it goes sour, I could lose everything. And I'd be like, okay, let me protect your assets.
True,
here.
because remember, in this spot, the person's also saying, oh, by the way, I'm not doing it. I'm not coming to work, and I want to get paid for it.
Well, that's the other aspect to the story. He
and I
definitely
know there's
doesn't
more
deserve
to it
be
than
paid.
that. I know he wants for camp,
Yes,
and I
but
get it.
That's a different. We can
For
have
camp,
that debate.
But see, here's the thing: for
separate.
camp, he should get paid for his camp.
Yeah,
that's my thing.
You know what I'm
Anything
doing?
other than that, no.
Well, I'm with you guys. It needs to be in the contract. One, it needs to be like, hey, if you're not
contract.
rebooked in the next 30 days, you get and I think if I'm Dana, he is fighting in 30 days in his hometown against Stevens for an interim belt, because now just take a step back, because we had a fight for you. We needed your help. We've helped you. Now you're fighting him on our terms, because Holloway needs some time to figure out what's ever going on with his head.
Yes.
Let's do it in T-City. You want to sell some tickets? And T-City is his hometown, isn't it? I think it is. I think he's a California guy.
Yeah.
So
There
you
it
go.
in LA.
Let's sell some tickets.
Third fight, you'll have 3
Let's
title
make him look
fights.
like a superstar.
So
All right, let's end it there, guys. Thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to follow us, tell your friends about us. You can find us on Twitter, Facebook, Patreon. Everything should be in the show notes.
Dillashaw in a couple weeks.
Dillashaw in a couple weeks coming your way. A new episode of MMA Untold. Thank you guys for listening. We're out.
Same number, same hood. It's all good. And if you don't know, now you know, you know, you know.